All right, all right. So the first thing we're gonna watch is from the Space Coder. I don't know how to handle this title, but I will come with a hot take. The title is Star Citizen. Should PvP be optional? And I think I'm going to come with something pretty hot. My response to that is yes. We're going to let him cook. I'm going to link you guys the video because I don't know how many times we've ever watched a video from Space Coder on the channel. I think once it was a really good deep dive into crafting. So we're going to let him cook. We're going to see what he says because I think the answer is yes, but in a unique and probably not a way that you would think. So I think you would understand me once I say it. But anyway, let's get into the video.
Hello citizens and welcome back. In today's video, I want to talk about PvP in Star Citizen, how it compares to other games, and how CIG are addressing excessive PvP. As always, if you like this video...
Okay, what is excessive PvP? That's not a thing.
Sacrifice a like and a comment to the YouTube algorithm and subscribe for more. And here's a shout out to our amazing patrons for their support of the channel and the Armory. The PvP debate has been around for as long as Star Citizen itself. At this point, it's pretty much a weekly occurrence on Spectrum. Sometimes the threads are good and constructive, sometimes they're not. But
in an Eve way? Again, this is PvP does not equal griefing, harassment, any of those things. We need to make that very clear. At least for me, when I said, should PvP be optional?
Common denominator is that the comments get out of hand way too fast, as I am sure comments under this video are going to.
Of course, the moment you make a title like this, people are going to immediately, I noticed that, at least when I make videos, and I'm sure you do too, Space Coder, is if you make a title similar to this, people will respond to the title or the thumbnail without ever watching the video. So I guarantee he has some comments below.
Lots of insults and threats start getting thrown around, which then causes the thread to get locked before constructive discussion is had. And I think that's very much needed on this topic because player interactions are essential to Star Citizen. So I suppose that's why I'm making this video. Now,
and I will do my best to provide commentary that is constructive as well. Even though I'm very worried about from the first 10 seconds of the video that this is going to be...
Now, I don't claim to have all the answers, but I believe that there is a middle ground that suits all groups. Also, I would like to point out the caveat that the game is still very much an alpha and the majority of the systems that would regulate player interactions are not yet in place. So... which, at year 10, is an unacceptable excuse from a creator or the developers, right? The whole point of 2.0 and the beginning of 3.0 should have been to nail down these areas. I think in a situation where you have bad servers and player interaction is difficult to do, and there's been a lot of, I think CIG could have prioritized better over the last 5-6 years on figuring out these systems. I feel like Reputation could have been turned on very, very long ago, but I'm not a game developer, and I don't know what steps along the line enabled what they're about to put in 3.23 with the most recent debate was kicked off because some of the members of GrieferNet were temporarily banned after allegedly disrupting a player-organized event.
Okay.
In this case, I believe it was the Daymar Rally. If you haven't heard about the Daymar Rally...
It was the Daymar Rally, it was the experience, it was every event possible, right? And that's what they did. They're player killers. It is what it is. That's how I see it. It is what it is, but... I think at times the way they handle themselves makes it a lot worse than just jumping events.
Here's a quick summary.
Yeah, temporarily banned is a suspension. CIG will never ban anybody. That's honestly what I feel. There are very few people who get banned because that means that they lose potential ship buyers.
The Daymar Rally is an annual racing event that takes place on Daymar. It is essentially an endurance race on the surface of the moon. It has been around for several years now, and the team behind it are very talented and passionate about bringing this and other events into Star Citizen. Now,
okay, so should we go back to this game is in pre-alpha and events in game are not ready to be run yet? Should we go back to that as well? Because if we're going to use the this is in pre-alpha, therefore we don't have the ability to protect players, then this is in pre-alpha, we don't have the ability to run events in game either and protect players.
while the Daymar Rally is a player-organized event, it has become a major event in Star Citizen in general. And
not only has it become a major event, it's canon now, it's in lore.
it has even grown to the point where it has attracted external companies as sponsors. And since last year, the Daymar Rally is even part of the Star Citizen lore.
Yeah.
On the other side of the story is GrieferNet, which is one of a few pseudo-organizations focused on causing maximum disruption of the game for other players in Star Citizen. Allegedly, they disrupted this year's Daymar Rally to such an extent that CIG has taken actions to temporarily ban some of their members, as far as we know. This means that their actions were deemed to be
What does he mean by pseudo-org? I don't know what that means.
in
but yeah.
breach of terms of service and the stream sniping and griefing policy. But CIG didn't elaborate on this in public as far as I know, so
And they never will, and they never should, because if they elaborate on where the rules are black and white, then everybody will go right up to the line and just not cross it, right? So they'll be just as annoying as they possibly can be. And yeah, should the ban have occurred at all? I don't know. I don't know enough about the situation to speak on it. I don't know. Okay? All I know is nobody feels bad for GrieferNet. Nobody's ever going to feel bad for GrieferNet because nobody believes that these type of things should be happening in the game, right? Because there's no reason to jump the Daymar Rally. There's no reason to jump the experience event. There's no reason to jump that event that Smashly did a while ago, right? I think GrieferNet jumped that as well. There's no need to do those things because there's no gain from it, except for notoriety, which again, where notoriety in a game that's pre-alpha that nobody cares, nobody plays, right? Like it is, we are still in a testing environment, so nobody's going to feel bad for you if you get banned because it doesn't make sense to the players who are actually playing, right? They don't get it and they'll never get it because it doesn't make sense. When there's a game and when there's something to conspire over gaining, then those Eve ops and stream sniping and Discord sniping and creating 50 Discord accounts to infiltrate an org, is anybody going to think that that isn't legitimate gameplay? I feel like everybody would feel that that is legitimate gameplay when there's a good reason behind it. But nobody understands the reasons behind wanting to cause chaos, right? So nobody's going to feel bad for them.
we don't have
And
any
that's
details.
essentially what's
Anyway,
happening.
that's enough of the recent drama. I would say that griefing is a very small subset of PvP interactions in Star Citizen, even
Agreed.
if accusations are thrown around on a regular basis. So before we move further into the video, I think we need to go over the rules CIG have defined. So far, publicly, CIG have taken a very vague stance on what is griefing and excessive PvP. In a nutshell, CIG say that they prefer the PvP solution, meaning that if you're a target of PvP, you should team up with your friends and fight back. We will get into more details in a moment, but generally this is a reasonable stance. They of course have provided some examples of what they consider to be griefing, and it pretty much follows the commonly accepted definition of using exploits to repeatedly disrupt gameplay of other players. They have also provided a way to report this behavior. This also came with a definition of stream sniping, meaning players using live streams or other platforms to find targets to attack. This specifically refers to infiltrating Discord servers and similar out-of-game actions. The problem
There's no way to enforce any of that. So there's no way to make it a rule, right? And that's how I feel about it. As somebody who streams, I fully expect to be stream sniped, and there's nothing I can do about it.
problem with these is that it's extremely difficult to link the in-game consequences to a specific person, which makes it very difficult to punish the perpetrators. I would also like to point out that in-game scouting and infiltration are valid tactics to be used in PvP interactions. But
we're on 100-player servers and server hopping and all these. Like, how about this? We are still in a situation where we are creating rules instead of why is there a giant global list of the people that are globally on a server still? You take that away, most of these situations are gone, because you don't know if you're on a server with somebody unless they type in Gen Chat if you get rid of that, right? So I don't know. I find that one to be incredibly odd. What MMO lists the entire server list of people that are on your server? Like, come on.
by being in-game actions, they can't be mitigated and defended against. When players face actions that originated out of the game, it's difficult.
Eve does? WoW does? Really? UO didn't, no. Eve, but it's annoying there as well. Yeah, I don't think it's a good idea, personally.
To do
Eve has local. Okay.
anything about it. And that's why perpetrating such actions should be against the TOS. But now, why haven't CIG publicly stated the full list of offenses, their investigative process, and the potential consequences? Simply put, it gives them the discretion to investigate and address each report individually. This essentially frees them from having to adhere to inflexible rules. And this way, after punishment is dealt, the person can't say that someone else did the same thing and were punished differently. Also, if CIG implemented some system to detect excessive PvP and similar behaviors, I don't think they would...
Stop saying excessive PvP, please. What does that mean? You have to define what that is in order to say it. That is a ridiculous word, and it doesn't make any sense. Because that would mean... What would define excessive PvP? That means somebody who plays Arena Commander all day is an excessive PvPer and should be banned. Like, just the way it's being worded. So, I think I know what he means. He means harassment. He means griefing. But I wish he would just say that.
Want to publicly acknowledge that it exists, or what exactly it's looking for and how. This would be to prevent people from coming up with ways to circumvent the system. Now, I think it's a good time to talk about how CIG classify players based on the activities they prefer. CIG have talked about this in the recent episode of Inside Star Citizen about distribution centers. I thought it was very interesting. Essentially, they split players by lawful and unlawful based on their alignment with the law, and then also by passive and active based on their stance on combat. According to this, you could make an alignment chart just like this one.
Yeah.
So an active, lawful player will be someone taking mercenary contracts to defend facilities or to capture...
But I really... What I gathered from that video, though, was that it was entirely how they view PvE, not PvP. It's like the type of mission you would take, rather than the type of player you are, was more what I gathered. Was like, all right, we have PvE missions for these players. We have PvE missions for these players. We have PvE for here and for here. So, therefore, we have all the gameplay you could possibly want, which, not entirely
bounties.
True.
A passive lawful player will be mining, salvaging, or trading. On the other side, a lawless active player will be trying to rob facilities or pirate other players. It gets a bit complicated with lawless passive players. The CIG depiction was not exactly a passive one, but I would imagine...
So, and Mattbert, you think PvP with no gain or targeted PvP against a player or a group is the excessive PvP? Okay. I feel like a lot of you guys aren't MMO players and don't realize that there are players who will exist to just kill other players because it's like a bit of a chess game and I outsmarted them. Whether it's seal clubbing, whether it's killing legitimate PvPers, it's, yeah, like being an ass, which that would be kind of defined as being an asshole, is not actually griefing, right? So there's I think the definition of griefing was like pretty clear by them. It was like, always going after the same person, making sure that they could not play the game at all. That's different than what I'll explain and why I mean that, should PvP be optional. I'm waiting for him to share his thoughts on that and get to the point of the title. But he's going through like kind of everything. So again, we'll let him cook.
Imagine smugglers and hackers fall into this category. However, I think that they are missing something, and not all possible player profiles are captured. So for my own Star Citizen player alignment chart, I have added a third axis.
Okay.
And that is profit. I have also renamed the active and passive axis to combat seeking and combat avoidant. While this does add a layer of complexity to the chart, I think it helps it capture player behavior better. I know it's quite complicated, but bear with me. So I believe that every player can find themselves somewhere on this chart. But let's talk about some examples. A lawful, combat-seeking, for-profit player will again be a mercenary looking for defense and bounty contracts. A lawful, combat-avoidant, for-profit player will again be a miner or a trader. A lawful, combat-seeking, non-profit player would likely be someone providing medical services in combat zones or someone delivering humanitarian supplies. On the other hand, lawful, combat-avoidant, and non-profit player will essentially be a tourist or an explorer, just enjoying the beauty of the verse. On the unlawful side, an unlawful, combat-seeking, for-profit player will be a mercenary or a pirate. An unlawful, combat-avoidant, for-profit player is likely going to be a smuggler or someone who provides services. An unlawful, combat-avoidant, non-profit player is probably going to be very rare. But again, I think
they won't be that rare, but they do exist, and it is legitimate gameplay.
it
And
would
I
be
think that's what
someone
he's saying by
providing
this
medical
chart.
assistance, but in unlawful areas. Now, an
never mind.
unlawful, combat-seeking, non-profit player is what I call a murder hobo. They're
Yes. Or I call them a player killer. And in my opinion, it's legitimate gameplay.
only joy is to cause harm and chaos without any clear gain, and a small subset of these will be actual griefers.
Okay, so him and I are sort of on the same page because he's saying only a subset of these people will be considered griefers. So they're probably going to be a small subset of the player base, and they're going to be a subset, a smaller subset will be considered griefers. He's not calling all of them griefers. So make sure you're listening to what he's saying before you get a little ragey about this.
The difference between a murder hobo and a griefer is pretty clear. A murder hobo will kill anyone for the joy of killing.
Yep.
A griefer will use any means possible to disrupt gameplay, whether that is using exploits, pad ramming, or other methods. Now,
And to me, it's usually targeted at an individual, right? Or a group. And if you think like the Daymar rally being targeted is what I mean, that's not necessarily what I mean. Because I think jumping things like the Daymar rally and jumping things like other player events, the reason behind doing that is to create not notoriety, but become like infamous. You know what I mean? It gives you a reputation. So I think that's like sort of like these are the the toughest pilots, these are the toughest PKers, whatever you want to describe. It starts to give you a reputation. There's no point in having a reputation at this moment. So the players who are playing the game can't comprehend why you would want to have a bad reputation at this time, right? So that's sort of what the problem is. It'd be like having Tusken Raiders out on the pod racing track. Yeah, and everybody hates Tusken Raiders, right? Like they're super annoying. And if that's what you want to be, that's what you kind of want to RP, okay, So it should be technically allowed, but I think the player base and even CIG is like, these guys are doing this for no reason and blah 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 blah. But the reason is because you can.
Realistically, these are very extreme and very rare cases.
Not really. Tusken Raiders are doing it because the races take place on their territory, not just for shits and giggles. Oh, true, yeah. But fair enough.
Every player will likely find themselves in this chart, and the vast majority of players will likely find themselves closer to the middle. So where do you stand on this chart? Let me know in the comments. So now that we talked about the existing facts and rules, let's talk about the two sides of the ongoing PvP debate. Basically, the vocal part of the community is split in two camps. One side advocates for making PvP combat fully optional. This is the so-called PvP toggle or separate PvE servers. On the other side, you have mostly PvP players saying that Star Citizen was supposed to be a player versus all game, so a PvP toggle makes no sense. The pro-separation group brings some interesting arguments. The gist of it is that players currently have very few ways to defend themselves or rather prevent the attack before it happens. And that combat mostly tends to disrupt gameplay rather than create emergent gameplay. And while
also combat is not very balanced, right? In a lot of ways. The my favorite thing is like the A2, right? We brought the A2 in knowing full well that it was going to disrupt the game, and that's what it did. But we wanted to sell a giant bomber, so we did. And nobody cares. And that's the thing is like a lot of these are being used in these situations, and I mean, let's be fair, the A2 is fairly balanced now. You can shoot down the bombs and all that stuff, but it's still one of these situations where I think you can apply that the game isn't like super balanced or whatever.
those are valid and interesting points, I think it's a bit early in the development to tell how CIG want to handle this. And
imagine saying that in 2024. It should not be too early to determine how CIG wants to handle anything. They should have communicated to you, not just via words, but via actions, how they want to deal with the universe that they're creating. In 3.0, this shit should have been clear. But no, we needed to focus on making pretty planets and moons, right? And that's sort of the problem is the visuals have always come first. The way we interact with the world is still second. Still.
And while they do have some systems in place, I'm going to talk about those later. First, I want to take a look at some findings from other games. It's a universal fact that excessive PvP and griefing lead to poor player retention. This was found not only in Elite Dangerous, but also in EVE or DayZ, and even in New World.
Did you literally just say DayZ, which is more popular than it's ever been? New World doesn't have PvP. Like, you literally decide whether or not you want a PvP in New World. Okay. I need to, like, listen to this again before I get...
Griefing lead to poor player retention. This was found not only in Elite Dangerous, but also in
Elite Dangerous, a solo game that has solo mode.
EVE or DayZ, and even in...
Does EVE have poor player retention?
New World. New World especially had a problem with recovering even after special measures were introduced. So,
what is New World? What is he talking about?
Elite Dangerous does have a solo mode, which is the equivalent of PvE servers in Star Citizen. Essentially, it allows you to play in the live universe, but without meeting any players. I wasn't able to find any concrete data from Frontier on how many players use solo mode and how many players use open play. Most unofficial reports suggest an even split or slightly leaning towards solo mode. Elite did have a problem with excessive PvP in open play. Frontier eventually addressed this by introducing very harsh in-game penalties to players who exhibit murder hobo behavior. This is mostly in the form of in-game fines, bounties, and reputation loss, which lead to the player losing access to resources and logistics. Which
again, I'm going to let him cook. He's coming to the point, and then I'll share my thoughts, okay?
Eventually undermines their ability to continue. DayZ faced a similar problem, which was impacting player retention. The developers introduced limited safe areas and very harsh reputation punishments for excessive killing of other players.
Are there safe areas in DayZ? DayZ base game. Yeah. The developers of private servers created those things. So like black markets and things like that, right? And honestly, I think it has helped on those modded servers because, you know, you get to the safe area, you're able to sell things, and you could chill for a minute. But Vanilla DayZ doesn't have any of that. So the developers didn't do that. The developers of modded servers did that. So, okay. I'm glad I understood that as well. I think those black market things are cool because, like, it's dangerous once you get to them. But once you get to them, you've like, all right, I survived. I'm good. And then it's dangerous once you leave those. And I imagine those are the highest camped areas in the entire game, right? Since there were a lot of people that chimed in, my guess is a lot of you guys play DayZ. I watch a lot of DayZ content. I'm assuming that those are jumped a lot, right? Am I correct on that? Usually against server rules to camp traders. Interesting. Okay. Arc or Rust, I'm not familiar with either. I've watched a little bit of Rust content, the zero Arc. I have hundreds of hours, but I mostly only play vanilla. Okay, well, maybe somebody will chime in a minute.
Though the game's reputation never quite recovered. Another game that took a major player retention hit was Darkfall Online.
I don't know this one.
It was a full loot, open PvP MMO, and it initially faced major issues with excessive PvP. And even though the developers implemented changes to the loot system and added safe zones and incentives for player cooperation, the game shut down due to low player count. And of course I have to mention Eve. Eve is famous for open PvP and generally a very harsh learning curve. It did face issues with low retention of new players due to relentless PvP and very harsh losses on death. Eventually, safe areas for new players were introduced as well as improved tutorials. The game has recovered and the core PvP element remains. Also, Eve offers other paths.
People also, Star Citizen also has safe zones. People forget that. Well, people ignore that because it's always been in CIG's conversations that they want to remove them and have the game protect players. So the like assuming that Armistice zones will stay around is hard to do because CIG always says that they want to remove them. So I think that's why players ignore the safe zones because they don't believe they're intended to be there permanently.
As the success besides combat, so players have multiple options. Of course, there are games that don't have issues with PvP. One example I can think of is Elder Scrolls Online. The main reason ESO didn't have any issues with PvP is because PvP is limited to certain areas and players have to very willingly travel to those areas. Everywhere else, PvP is reserved for consensual duels. It also has level scaling to make PvP more balanced. There are other examples such as Guild Wars or Albion Online. However, the common elements between these are that PvP has a very well defined set of rules and guidelines, and in some cases even areas designated for it. Also, they reward both sides of the fight in some way, meaning that the loser doesn't get discouraged. And they offer alternative options besides PvP. Actually, even a fully PvP game like Foxhole offers non-combat gameplay. In Foxhole, logistics, construction, and resource management are very important. And players who don't want to fight can...
But correct me if I'm wrong, even if you're doing that kind of gameplay, then comparing SC to actual games, yeah. But like Foxhole, you could get attacked while doing those things, right?
Find a lot of success in doing these supporting activities. So how does Star Citizen do this? Star Citizen is technically a full loot MMO with open PvP, but it also has limited save zones. And there technically is a system of punishments in the form of crime stat and jail sentences. There will eventually also be a reputation system that will make murder hobo behavior a lot more difficult by removing access to resources. Also, once multiple star systems are implemented, some of them will have a higher security status. This will technically create a way for players to opt out of PvP by simply relocating to an area where PvP is very difficult. But at face value, it's difficult to say if this will be enough to discourage excessive PvP. But I think that CIG is not...
I cannot get past excessive PvP. I'm really struggling with that phrase.
Not done implementing features to prevent this. I am very curious to see how reputation is going to impact this. I think CIG are very well aware of the potential issues when creating an open PvP game.
Hey, Letty.
I am sure they have a lot of features to regulate PvP and keep it productive and in the designated areas. I also think there is a very good reason they don't publish any information on related features. First of all, this topic tends to generate a lot of drama in the community. Also, as I mentioned before, giving information on these systems generally leads to people finding ways to get around them. Also,
Yes.
I think that measures to control excessive PvP are very low priority for CIG at the moment. It's much more important to get other features like server meshing and additional star systems before reputation and regulation comes in.
Okay, so he never really answered the question, but he did go through a lot of the all good, Letty. He did go through a lot of the the background of everything, right? So here's my feelings on the whole should PvP be optional and why I say yes. It should be optional to the player to go to locations that are safe if they don't want to deal with PvP and they want to do things in a more chill way. But CIG has not provided those locations, right? I'm sorry, but sitting inside of a space station is not exactly enjoyable, right? And then we also don't have a system like Pyro, and even what we have seen about a system like Pyro, we didn't see a lot of examples of high reward for the risk that you're taking there, right? Yet. So hopefully if we get another Pyro preview, and I'm assuming we will this year, we might be able to see a bit of that. But the reason I think that PvP should be optional is the player should know that they are in an area where it's possible, where it's dangerous. And I don't think the Stanton system should be as dangerous as it is. The Stanton system should have a pocket, an individual or a select individual of small areas of risk and reward. Maybe, I don't know, like a good example now is like Brio's Breaker Yard. But yeah, you could even do something like an entire moon, maybe. I don't know. But or like Grim Hex, things like that. Right? And then you start to at least share the thought process around what you wanted to do long term and just let everybody know that, you know, eventually the system will become more safe and or less safe or whatever they decide to do. But in my opinion, a player should, if they're paying attention, should know the risks when they leave like a given area, right? But right now, the risk is the moment you leave your hangar, it's just chaos all the time, and there's no place to just chill. There's no place to mine like iron, make no money, but go through the process. There's no place for a new player to learn the ropes. There's no place for an event like an RP event to happen, right? And those things are all part of MMOs.
And the idea of, yeah, like I see it, just hire escorts is not a good option because it still means that in your area you're going to be experiencing these things. And that's just not the solution to these problems, right? This is a video game problem. This isn't a simulator like oh, it's not going to be like space isn't like that in real life. None of that matters. You have a player base that is going to be somewhat casual, and then you have a player base that's going to want a PvP. And you have the in-between players who want to take the risk to go to the PvP areas for the rewards. And in the game, you have no rewards, you have no risk, you have no fear of death, you have even the full loot aspects of the game, you lose nothing. So it's a weird situation. It's a Care Bear problem. No, it's not. It's a problem on both sides, and in my opinion, it's a game dev problem. It is a design choice or prioritizing certain designs before the actual foundations of your game, which should have been maybe not a law system, but yeah, I think a law system is sort of the best way to describe it because that's what we have now. It's a design choice problem. It is, we left this system that you've been playing in for 5+ years to be completely open and problematic. I've already addressed the space is dangerous problem. This is a video game. You have issues where there's players who want to play a video game a certain way, and you have players who want to play it in another way. And you are clearly a PvP player, right? I am not sharing specifically just my opinion of how I think. I like the idea of risk. I like the idea of PvPing. I like all that. But I also understand, because I've played other games, that not every player wants to experience that. And I also understand how important a casual player base or a non-combat focused player base is to an MMO. And if you want the game to be completely open all the time, you're not going to have a good, healthy game, period. Right? So you need to have a good, healthy game of players who are spending time chilling out, talking, hanging out, building community. And then the best healthy game creates this desire to want to get out of your comfort zone and go to the dangerous areas, right? That's the most healthy game. And CIG has developed exactly zero of that. Outside of Jumptown, maybe, which was a fucking mistake from the beginning. So for me, when I say should PvP be optional, the player should have the ability to hang out and take the option to go out of their comfort zone and take the risk for some potential reward, knowing that there's going to be opportunists out there trying to kill them and take what they have. And with that, your ship, your gear, your fuel, your cargo, whatever you have on you would hopefully be of value to the player who's PvPing as well, right? Because you're going to have your murder hobo types. Those are always going to be there. But even then, the murder hobo type might want your med pens, might want your fuel, might want food, drink, because maybe it's really hard to get those things. And it should be hard to get those things for a murder hobo. So if you're bringing food and drink, they kill you. Now it's not so bad, right? So I really, really feel that way about how the game should be. And I don't think we should be spending our energy being mad at the griefer. You should be spending your energy talking about giving feedback to CIG about prioritizing these systems sooner than later, because you want the ability to feel that risk and reward, or you want that ability to chill, and you want that ability to have a PvP zone or whatever, right? Like a lot of games use like these areas of zones, or Eve was given as an example where it's like different security levels. Albion Online was an example, same situation, right? And I think Star Citizen wants to go in that direction. We heard it in the design for base building.
We've heard it in design for many other scenarios. So that's what I look at. The upside of having danger zones that it gives PvPers a smaller area to actually find people to attack. Yes. Also a thing in a game that's like space is big, right? No one will go to PvP zones, though. That will be CIG's fault if that's the case, right? Again, they have to create a system that makes players want to get out of their comfort zone and go to those areas. That has to be a thing, right? You have to be willing to take the risk because it's worth it. The rewards have to be there. The type of components, the type of materials to craft components that are valuable for players in PvP and PvE zones. I'm also not expressing how many safe zones there should be, right? I'm not saying the entire game should be safe and the PvP zones should be small. I didn't say that, right? I think that most of the game should be unsafe, but there should be some places where players can learn how to mine, do a couple missions, right? Deliver some boxes, and not have to look over their shoulder and deal with any shit about it. That's just how I feel. Yeah, I feel that there should be less safe zones than not, but there needs to be safe systems, like entire systems that are safe, right? But you just shouldn't make any money doing it, and you shouldn't reap any real rewards. It should be a place where you get to learn how to play the game, where you get to RP, where you get to show off your hard work by, showing the cape that you got off of a Vandal in a raid type of mission or of some kind, if that's ever a thing, right? Those need to be options because that is part of your player base, right? And it's probably going to be a majority of your player base. So anybody who is a PvPer has to recognize that you will always be the minority of the player base. So, but that doesn't mean that you should have the minority of location or danger. Dangerous areas should be in the minority. I'm not saying that, but I think it's a game design problem. It's not necessarily a people problem because the people problem will always exist. There's always going to be PKers. There's always going to be casual players. So it's up to CIG to deal with it in the right way, which they haven't yet, right? And they had every opportunity, in my opinion, at least. I mean, I'm not a game dev, I don't know, but it seems like they had plenty of time to deal with this problem, but instead they dealt with other problems. And that is on them. So if you're spending your energy being upset, who should it be at? Should it be at the guy griefing who's been allowed to do it for 10 years? Or should it be at the person who hasn't prioritized anything to protect you and give you a legitimate place to play the game the way you want to? Both, maybe that's a legitimate argument, but at the same time, nobody is talking about CIG in these scenarios. They're only complaining about excessive PvP and griefers, right? Or you're a casual player, you're a loser, this is a PvP game. That's most of the arguments. Almost none of the arguments are pointed at the company who has done nothing to support the video game whatsoever. So that's my thoughts on it. Should PvP be optional? Absolutely. And it should be up to the player to know that they are, taking the risk and going to these areas. And that's it. That's how I feel.